Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this event to launch the Breakthrough Agenda Report 2023. The Breakthrough Agenda's goal is to accelerate low-carbon transitions through strengthened international cooperation. At its launch at COP26, 45 countries agreed to work together to make clean technologies and sustainable solutions the most affordable, accessible, and attractive options in key emitting sectors of the global economy before the end of this decade. Its membership has since grown to include countries covering around 80% of global GDP. The annual Breakthrough Agenda Report assesses the state of international collaboration in each sector and advises countries and non-state actors on how they can work together to make low-carbon transitions faster, less difficult, and lower cost. At COP27 last year, countries responded to the first Breakthrough Agenda Report by agreeing a set of 28 priority actions that they would take together to accelerate transitions. This year, we expect this report to help set the stage for further actions to be agreed at COP28. In today's launch event, you will hear first from the leaders of the three organisations that are co-authors of the Breakthrough Agenda Report. They are Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Mr. Francesco La Camera, Director General of the International Renewable Agency, who will give his presentation via a pre-recorded video message, and Dr. Mahmoud Mahoudin, the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27. Next, officials from the three co-author organisations will share some of the key findings from the report, after which there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And finally, there will be a panel discussion involving three distinguished speakers to hear their reflections on the report. Those speakers are Ms. Lee McDonough, Director General for Net Zero, Nuclear and International in the UK Government's Energy Department, Ms. Maria Mendelucci, Chief Executive Officer of the Women Business Coalition, and Mr. Simon Bertbach, Director of the Energy Transition at the COP28 Presidency in the United Arab Emirates. So to begin, I will hand over to Dr. Fatih Birol from the IEA.
Thank you, Mrs. May. It is good to hear from you, and many thanks to all the colleagues who are following this launch of the second edition of the report. And I am thankful to all the institutions who joined the IEA to put this report together. So 1 year ago, we were here and we discussed where we are in terms of clean energy transitions. And when I look at the last year, where we were and this year, I am happy to share with you our assessment that within the last 1 year, clean energy transitions moved fast and faster than many people think. One of the beauties of working at the IEA is we have data on every single corner of the global energy sector. Coal, solar, renewables, electricity, oil, everything, and in all countries and in all sectors. All the investments in the energy sector, year by year, we are following, sometimes even on a daily basis. When we look at all this data around the world, it is impossible not to find out that the clean energy transitions are moving fast and faster than many people think. And in that context, dear colleagues, only 2 days ago, we have published some of our projections for the next years to come, for this decade. Some of you might have seen, we say that even with the current policies, even there are no additional policies are implemented to push the climate agenda, clean energy agenda, even with the existing policies, we see that the coal, oil, and natural gas consumption globally set to peak within this decade. This is, of course, a very good news, especially from a climate perspective. Why this is happening? There are three reasons. First, spectacular penetration of solar power across the world. Second, big rise in the electric car sales. And third, slowing down of Chinese economy, which has been responsible and overwhelming part of the fossil fuel growth globally. So putting all of these three things together and other factors, we see that even with the existing policies, with current policies, global fossil fuel consumption will peak and start to decline. Having said that, this decline will not bring us even closer to our target, climate target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. What to do? So there are many conditions we need to fulfill according to our net zero report we published last year, and the next one is in making. One of them is, our report says, we need to triple the renewable electricity capacity globally. It's number one. We are growing strongly in renewables, but we need to triple if we want to be in line with the IES 1.5 scenario. Second, we need to double the global energy efficiency improvement. It's another important challenge. Only last June, we brought more than 50 countries, governments around the world, from China to United States, from the African countries, Europeans, and others, agree on a statement, and we call it Versailles energy efficiency statement, to double the energy efficiency. So this is the second condition after renewables. And the third one, these are good renewables and efficiency, but it is not enough. We need to see the unabated fossil fuels need to decline as well. Renewables growth, efficiency growth alone will not be enough. If we are serious about 1.5, we have to see that there is an international agreement push on the significant decline in the unabated use of coal, starting with coal, followed by oil and gas. So these are some of the conditions that we think we need to reach the 1.5 degrees target, some of the three conditions that IEA is keen to highlight at every occasion. What are the hurdles? There are many hurdles I can go through with you, but if I have to pick up one of them, it is the lack of international collaboration. Our analysis show that in the case of there is an international collaboration among the countries, reaching our climate targets would be less costly and faster than otherwise around. So therefore, international collaboration for us is critical, and it is one of the reasons we, together with our colleagues from IRENA and from high-level champions, put this report together. And I would like to hear once again thank the government of United Kingdom for facilitating this work. As you will see in this report, we see, compared to last year's report, some progress, but we are not yet there where we would like to be. In a few minutes, my colleague, Dr. Gül, who is our Chief Energy Technology Officer, will give you some insights about this report. But I would like to stop here. Once again, thanking our collaborators, UK government and others to put this important report together in order to show why international collaboration is important and how we can put the different forces together to reach our international climate targets. With this, over to you, Mrs. May.
Thank you very much. We're now going to hear a recorded message from Mr. Francesco La Camera.
At the outset, let me thank my friends Fatih and Mahout for the great cooperation on this report. It is in itself an example of strength of collaboration. This report is coming out at a highly complex moment where the international cooperation is needed more than ever. At the same time, the very concept of cooperation is challenged from all sides. Despite this, we are observing progress across different sectors and geographies, although this process is modest and leaves significant room for improvement. Technological solutions that can get us to 2030 exist, and most of them are already cost-effective. One central solution is renewable energy, which we extensively cover in this report. IRENA has long argued that investing in renewables is a smart way to build resilience, energy security, and social and economic prosperity. To give you one example, IRENA estimates in 2022 the renewable power deployed globally since 2000 saved 520 billion in full cost in the electricity sector. So the fossil fuel price crisis in the past few years was a telling reminder of the power economic benefit that renewable power can provide. But we have a long way to go. IRENA World Energy Transition Outlook called for tripling of renewable capacity by 2030 for several years now. And we welcome the push of the COP28 presidency to rally action around this goal. This will require international cooperation at many fronts. In the report, we point out the transition, especially for developed countries, at this stage is more of a financial issue than a technical one. In 2022, as we were the case of previous year, less than 2% of the total world investment was in Africa, where the needs are the greatest. The breakthrough agenda and our joint report come ahead of COP28. That will show that the world is not on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. What we do after the global stocktake will be of high consequences. We show that greater international cooperation can amplify ambition and accelerate progress. Innovation is not solely the domain of technology. The new energy era needs a new blueprint for global collaboration. It is our hope that shedding the light on where strong international cooperation can make a difference in the coming year will be an important contribution of this report. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
And we will now hear from Dr. Mahmoud Mahoudin.
Right. Thank you so much, Francis. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in the launching of this important report. It's a good example of collaboration between the non-state actors and the agencies, international agencies responsible for energy and renewable energy, the IAA and IRENA. I listened carefully to the good interventions by Mr. Birol and Mr. La Camera, and I may react to that towards the end, but let me commend first this excellent collaboration between state and non-state actors and the good support and partnerships that we have as well from the UK. We recall that the whole idea came out from COP26 when 45 world leaders determined that it's important to accelerate innovation and deployment of clean technologies in various sectors. And I'm happy to see one sector added, or two sectors rather added this year, in addition to what we had in power, road transport, steel, hydrogen, agriculture sector. Now we have the buildings and cement sector. So we now cover over 60% of global emissions in this report. Like as well, the approach that this report is taking is very practical. It's emphasizing the merits of implementation and providing solutions, which have been highlighted in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. This report provides 39 concrete recommendations for countries and stakeholders to adopt, especially in areas related to seizing the opportunity for just transition. And the cycle, we have a cycle ending, and now the same end is the beginning of a new cycle. Now we have this review, identifying urgent opportunities. We need to identify priority actions at the country level. Each country needs really to update its action plan, aligned with its NDCs and the initiatives as well of the private sector. They need to mobilize resources to implement these action plans, seeking international cooperation. And then, of course, the report takes care of the mapping and the review again. So while we celebrate the good collaboration of this report, it's in itself launching a report and launching a process for next year as well. The good comments by Mr. Birol earlier and Mr. Lacamera telling us in different ways that there is progress, but the progress is not enough. Especially what Mr. Birol mentioned, that about the reasons of having more and more investments and contribution of renewables related to two positive news and what not necessarily positive, and I hope it will be short-lived. The first is the good news of the investments in solar power. The second is the more growth that we're seeing in electric vehicles. But of course, the slowdown in the Chinese economy is not welcome, given the significance of the Chinese economy and the world and its contribution to the supply chain. The other thing is basically that we see many countries in the global south, and I was just a few days ago in Kenya, seeking growth, high growth momentum. And as far as we can make sure through the collaboration of IAA, IRENA, and other agencies that this growth is going to be fueled by clean, green energy, the progress that we had so far is going to be protected and sustained. I like just before I conclude, I'd like to make a couple of areas of emphasis. One is basically on areas on finance and investments, including the work touching on matters related to decarbonization and the work, especially in the power sector, by new public and private commitments, including at the country level with the support of GFANs and the G7 and many collaborators in this field. So in addition to South Africa, we have now projects in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Senegal. Again, in the energy sector, in the hydrogen sector in particular, we see international financial institutions committing more than 6.4 billion to support developing economies, and the Hydrogen for Development Partnership launched by the World Bank is helping to catalyze project funding and the rest of the infrastructure required for the green hydrogen projects. In road transport, we see the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council bringing together nearly 50 countries to agree on priorities for technical assistance, while the GEF, Global Economic Mobility Program, and the World Bank's Global Facility to decarbonize transport are expanding assistance. In addition to that, I would like to highlight that the Global South is moving fast with initiatives and implementation of initiatives on finance. I like to highlight the good contribution by the Bridgetown initiatives in areas related to finance, linking debt management, financial innovation, and concessional finance to support just energy transition and climate action at large. I see as well that there is some important progress in the operationalization of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda with its different areas of work, very much linked to the work that we are doing. The whole matter here is not just on energy and hard-to-abate sectors, but when we're talking about settlements and improvement in urban development, planning and investments, there are opportunities for the adaptation agenda to be an area of focus. The second area, and this is the final area I'd like to mention, is basically the international public-private partnership that creates demand for clean technologies. In steel sector, for instance, there are more and more industrial sector leaders from the private sector in collaboration with governments pushing towards deep decarbonization. And we have the deep decarbonization initiative that is growing steadily, but we need that to be faster than it is. The impact of different efforts, especially in developing economies, we see a lot of work at the regional level as well, had highlighted significant progress in some countries and sectors, especially in road transport. More progress is needed in hydrogen, where commitments to create demand for low carbon and renewable hydrogen have only increased from 3% to 4%, despite the announcements. And as I said before, the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda that is basically providing a parallel area of work and an area of collaboration as well with the breakthrough agenda in different areas of work, and working with the same spirit of good collaboration between governments, public and private sectors, and seeking support as well from the international financial institutions. One final area to conclude. We are focusing on finance and technology. There is a great deal of role for incentives in regulations and policy formulation. I'm saying that because the hard-to-abate sector could be subject very soon to challenges, especially for the trading sector related to these hard-to-abate sector, including steel, cement in particular. And what we know now from Europe and its CBAM, the cross-border adjustment mechanism, requires some good attention, perhaps in the next report as a suggestion from me to be considered, is the implications of new regulations and policies on these sectors that we are tackling, especially when we are starting to see the impact of the operationalization of the CBAM approach of the European Union. Having said that, it's a very important report. I'm very pleased with the outcomes in terms of recommendations. And as always, it's all about implementation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. Now let's dive into the report findings, and I'll pass to Simon Sharp, Director of Economics of the Climate Champions team.
Good afternoon. Last week, the UN's Global Stocktake report said that more effective international cooperation was needed to close the emissions gap. In this report, we aim to say what that looks like, what forms of international cooperation can make low carbon transitions faster, less difficult, and lower cost. To be effective, international cooperation needs to have at least 4 characteristics. First, it needs the right focus. In each sector, it should be focused on the ways that countries can achieve more together than they can alone, like faster innovation through shared research and development, stronger signals for investment through coordinated action to create demand for new technologies, and level playing fields where they're needed. to ensure that trade is not a barrier to the transition. Second, it needs the right participation. It needs enough to shift global markets. Typically, the top 10 countries in a sector account for about 3/4 of global production or consumption. But in most sectors, the leading international initiatives now still fall short of membership that covers half of the global market. Third, political commitment is needed to progress from the softer forms of cooperation, like sharing best practice, to the harder forms, like aligning standards and policies, which are more difficult but can yield greater gains in mobilizing investment and accelerating cost reduction. Fourth, cooperation has to be sustained over time to build a common understanding and confidence. It cannot just be side events and summits. Countries need to invest properly in the institutions and processes for cooperation in each sector. We'll have the next slide, please. The overall picture is that only modest progress has been made since last year. The opportunities for stronger collaboration to accelerate transitions are far from being fully exploited. One of the areas where we see more progress being made is research and innovation. Last year, a group of countries committed $94 billion for clean energy demonstration projects. In mission innovation, a leading initiative in that space, countries have agreed to take forward 5 projects on 5 continents to demonstrate the integration of up to 80% renewable energy into power grids. That's a good example of the kind of cooperation that we need to see in each sector. And we need those kind of initiatives to go forward quickly and for the learning to be shared widely. In the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, members have committed over $10 billion to research and development for priorities like agroecology, methane emissions reduction from livestock, and the development of new crop varieties. There's also been progress, as Dr. Mahmoud said, in international finance and assistance, with new funds being launched in hydrogen, steel, and transport sectors, and the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, mainly focused on the power sector. But in every sector, more is needed, increased scale and accessibility of those international financial assistance programs. The third area where we've seen some progress has been towards convergence on standards to measure emissions and define low carbon products in steel, cement, and hydrogen. Now, where we're seeing less progress, and I really want to emphasize how much there's a need for more, is in demand creation, where countries aligning policies to create and grow markets for clean technologies has huge potential to achieve economies of scale and accelerate cost reduction. Dr. Mahmoud mentioned the growing membership of the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative, where countries aim to use public procurement to create markets for near zero emission steel and cement. That membership has gone up from 9% to 20% of the global steel market. That's encouraging, but countries really need to convert that intention into action with large, near-term, credible advanced purchase commitments and other supporting policies. The private sector initiatives have a very important role to play there too, aggregating demand for the new technologies. Similarly, on hydrogen, countries are missing the opportunity to deploy low carbon and renewable hydrogen quickly in the sectors where fossil fueled hydrogen is already used, like fertilizers and refining. And to make the power sector transition much easier, countries could agree high energy efficiency standards for the most electricity consuming products, like air conditioners and fridges, eliminating the most inefficient products from global markets and saving money and emissions. So much more is needed on demand creation. And finally, trade is another area where serious cooperation needs to begin. In the past year, 27 governments joined a climate club launched to work on industrial decarbonization and trade. But so far, this group only includes 2 of the top 10 emerging economies. In sectors where trade could critically hold back the transition, like steel and agriculture, it's essential to begin international dialogues that include the largest producer and consumer countries. I now pass on to my colleagues Timur and Elizabeth, who will give some highlights from a few of the sectors covered by the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Thanks a lot for the overview here. As Simon showed on his slide, we looked into many sectors, and we will not have the time to go through all of them individually to present in our webinar today our assessment of the relative progress. What we have decided to do is to give you insights into three sectors that were already part of the Breakthrough Agenda report last year and for which we are tracking progress, and one sector that is actually new to our work. The road transport sector is one of those where we already, which was already covered last year. It covers, in terms of type of vehicles, it covers light duty vehicles as well as heavy duty vehicles, 2- and 3-wheelers, as well as buses. And the good news, and our executive director mentioned this already in the beginning, is that we have seen very strong progress in the deployment of electric vehicles over the course of 2022, in particular in the segment of cars. Electric car sales actually exceeded 10 million in 2022, up 55% relative to the year before. And IEA analysis from earlier this year, launched as part of our global EV outlook, showed that we were expecting, and we continue to expect actually on data that we have seen so far, the sales to increase to 14 million by the end of this year, up 35% year on year relative to 2022. Now, this is all very good progress, but even here in the electric car segment or car segment, it is very important to highlight that the progress in terms of the total volume of sales is actually confined to a few large car markets. It's China, it's the European Union, and it's the United States. Elsewhere, we are still lacking somewhat behind, which is one of the reasons we do believe there is a continued need for accelerating international collaboration in this space. 2 points here to highlight from the report. There are more, of course, but the 2 points that are worth highlighting here is that for a faster and more widespread transition, countries and companies should align on common timelines by when all vehicle sales are zero emissions. And that's true for cars, but it's also true, of course, in other segments. Commitments in this regard have increased, but when aggregated by selected international initiatives, this only covers 20% of the sales of heavy-duty vehicles and only 12% for light-duty vehicles. Increasing these commitments from countries and companies can help send a much stronger international signal on both the direction and the pace of the transition in road transport, creating greater certainty for investment and increasing the size of the markets. The second point to highlight is that we found there was very good progress in the area of used vehicle trade, where countries have been working successfully to agree a way forward on the import of safer as well as cleaner used vehicles. This is of course important to ensure that importing countries, including in particular in the developing world, are not burdened with an excessive number of highly polluting and unsafe vehicles. Beyond these 2 points, we show in our report that further efforts are required to improve the offer of financial and technical assistance, particularly in the area of charging infrastructure, as well as in the harmonization of battery supply chain standards to promote sustainable production, use, and recycling. The second sector that we would like to discuss with you today here in the webinar, that was also already part of our report last year, is steel production. In fact, many of the colleagues here in the presentation or the webinar so far have already touched upon this sector, which is currently enjoying a lot of international attention. The transition here is at a much earlier stage compared to, say, the power sector or even road transport. There is no commercial scale near zero emission plant for the production of steel currently in operation worldwide. However, the analysis that we've carried out here at the IEA and that we've released over the past year or two shows very clearly that the pipeline of commitments for new plants before 2030 has increased substantially over the last year. There is a lot of good news in the context of international collaboration here, underpinned by IEA analysis in the context of the German as well as the Japanese G7 presidencies. Over the last 2 years, we have seen most progress in the steel sector in the area of standards, and here including both emission measurement methodologies for steel production, as well as the definitions for what we consider to be near zero emission steel, or green steel as some call it. In some initiatives focused on these issues, we have seen a marked increase in their membership and participation since last year. As my colleague Simon Sharp from the High Level Champions already mentioned, the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative, Responsible Steel is another one where we have seen, you see this on the top left-hand corner, an increased membership. Again, membership, as he pointed out, is good, but of course, action on the ground and further progress on critical areas will be important. On the definitions themselves, we are seeing encouraging signs of convergence around both the ambition level and the approach. You see this on the top right-hand corner in the chart. To accelerate this progress further, governments should, in our view, agree on key principles for measurement methodologies in order to help to facilitate trade. Likewise, for definitions, governments should start to adopt these in policies as soon as possible, latest by around the mid-2020s, using them to support measures such as procurement. At the IEA, we are very privileged to have established a new platform, actually, in the context of our committee work that will help governments to collaborate on these particular topics. Beyond standards here, just to say that further efforts, according to our assessment in the Breakthrough Agenda report, are required in the areas of demand creation, financial and technical assistance, research and innovation, as well as trade. In all cases, working with the major steel producing countries, particularly those that are still undergoing rapid industrialization, will be important to avoid significant emission lock-in in these countries. I now pass on the word to my colleague Elizabeth Press from IRENA for her intervention.
Thank you very much, Libor. And I will reflect on a couple more sectors, starting with hydrogen. It was mentioned quite a few times because we know hydrogen has been a high policy priority for the last few years, and it's actually quite interesting to deep dive and see how this sector is progressing from different angles and comparing to what recommendations we made the last year. So one, I think it was already mentioned by Dr. Mahmoud and Simon, that the sector is actually really not moving very fast because the deployment of renewable low carbon hydrogen is significantly below for what is required for the net zero pathway. As a consequence, there was no significant impact on emissions in the last year. So then the other obstacle, I would say, is that the costs still remained quite high. So renewable low carbon hydrogen remains more expensive than hydrogen from unabated fossil fuels. And the expectation is that with economies of scale, costs will go down, especially for electrolyzer capital cost. So the production remains below 1 megaton a year in 2022, and we estimate that the range has to be between 70 and 125 megaton a year by 2030. So we have a long way to go. The other observation that we are making is that the pilot project is plenty of pilot projects, but the geographical concentration of those is also limited, with the bulk of pilot projects taking place in Europe, and within Europe in a limited number of countries. So on this slide, we actually are showing that there has been progress in providing public finance and financial commitments for developing countries to tap into the potential in different regions. And since March 2022, international finance institutions have committed at least $6.4 billion to support renewable low carbon hydrogen development in developing countries. Again, this falls short of what is required for both public and private sectors, so the investment gap remains large. At present, IRENA is working with UNIDO and the World Bank to map what is at offer, what exists, so that we can actually have a greater visibility of where the possibilities for tapping into additional finance can be, but as well as to highlight the gaps. We have also observed some progress towards convergence of standards and certification for emissions and safety, which is also a very promising sign. However, we, as Simon was actually speaking about in the opening, there is really a pressing need to strengthen the collective demand signal for renewables and low carbon hydrogen from both public and private buyers, so that all these commitments and pledges are actually translated into contracts, projects, and policies. And obviously, the largest potential lies in the areas where hydrogen is already used, so that is the fertilizer and refining. So in IRENA, we actually have a work stream on within our collaborative framework of hydrogen that is looking to provide greater visibility, harmonization between demand and supply. So hopefully some progress will be seen in the coming years. Regarding the joint research and innovation activities, there is a need for greater prioritization of these sectors where hydrogen can provide the most value, specifically industry and shipping. Again, the geographical distribution of projects is really, really important. And for that, the exchange of knowledge and sharing of experiences will be critically important. Can we go to the next slide, please? I will also reflect on the buildings, which is a new sector that we have added this year to the breakthrough report. The reason is quite obvious. The buildings in 2022 accounted for about a third of total energy system emissions, combining both building operations and embodied emissions. Since 2015, the emissions in the sector were growing on average of 1% per year, which is overtaking any progress that has been made in the move to decarbonize the sector. So this is a new sector, and there was quite some work to map out the flurry of activity that already exists. It's a complicated landscape because it's highly fragmented across sectors with different layers of government, different stakeholders. But there is a lot that is going on. So one of the recommendations is really to look at what's going on and build and grow what is already there. So in this slide, we are showing what is the future of this sector, and about 90 countries today have some sort of energy code, but it is estimated that about 15% of the growth of this flow area by 2050 is not going to be covered by these energy codes. So that really underscores the importance of expanding and accelerated collaboration in this area. As I said, there is a flurry of activity in the building sector, but it's really highly fragmented, and there is a huge potential to improve coordination, alignment, and cooperation. As with all other sectors, the key one of the key recommendations is the harmonization of definitions, nomenclature, standards. It's really a step number one, so that there is a greater understanding and convergence around what is required in terms of terminology and performance. The other area that we are recommending international cooperation action is around strengthening procurement commitments. Again, one of the activities that has been working very well across many sectors, and where governments and policymakers have a great influence and the possibility to make a difference. So that the commitments in enhancing procurement commitments for net zero resilient buildings is really one of the areas where progress can be made, and especially focusing on deploying clean and efficient heating and cooling technologies. In the sector as well, and considering the slides that you see, the gap in building codes and the new floor area additions, the increasing funding and coordination, both in countries but also across regions and in developing countries, is absolutely necessary. And increasing knowledge gap in identifying knowledge gaps and the needs for research and development and alignment of current activity would really go a long way to move the sector. And finally, capacity building and knowledge sharing is incredibly important to develop the capabilities, institutional and workforce skills to implement the necessary changes in the coming years. With that, we conclude our technical presentation of the report, and I turn the floor back to our colleague Jethro, who will guide us through the Q&A segment of the discussion. Jethro, over to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for the presentation, and to Timur and Simon for their comments. And we now have a bit of time for a Q&A from the journalists and other stakeholders who are in the webinar part of this presentation. By the way, I'm Jethro Mullen, Head of Communications at the IEA. I'll just be moderating this part of the event. So please, we invite the participants in the Zoom to send your questions through the Q&A function if you can. We're just going to take a short break, just a couple of minutes, to give you time to send the questions, and we'll be right back to give our answers. We'll start going through. And for those sending questions, do encourage you to provide your name and organization when you send them through, if possible. But there's one question we'll maybe start off with, and it might be a good one for Simon, from the high-level champions, and this is, where have you seen the greatest signs of progress on international collaboration? So I guess which areas, and how can this be translated to other areas where the progress is lacking? Simon, would you have any thoughts on that?
Thanks. Well, I suppose in our presentations just now, I think all of us gave some examples of where we're seeing good cooperation. I mean, just to emphasize one of those examples again, Timur talked about road transport. I think something that's really interesting is the level of collaboration on heavy-duty vehicles. Of course, decarbonizing heavy road transport is more difficult than light road transport. We're talking about big trucks, but there's actually really significant movement there. There's an initiative called the Global Memorandum of Understanding on Zero Emission Heavy Duty Vehicles. Last year, the members of that covered 5% of that global market. Now they cover 20%. And that includes countries and over 75 non-state actors, including regional governments, vehicle manufacturers, fleet owners, and operators. And all of them are committing to a trajectory towards 30% of new truck sales being zero emission by 2030 and 100% by 2040. That kind of collective action can really shift industry expectations, shift investment, and bring down costs more quickly, making the transition easier for all countries. So I think, as we mentioned in our presentations, there are many different forms that international cooperation can take: the research and development, the technical assistance, financial assistance, aligning regulatory standards, working together on trade, creating demand through public procurement. When we look across all of these sectors, we can find good examples of any one of those. And so it's really useful to learn from those best examples and try and replicate them quickly in the other sectors.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Another question, a question from the Zoom. Perhaps Dr. Moaldin would like to take this one. It's asking what you're hoping to achieve by COP28 under the Breakthrough Agenda. I guess, you know, with the Breakthrough Agenda being something that was launched at COP26 and that you carried forward at COP27, where do you see it going from here to COP28 and beyond?
Right. Thank you so much. We are trying to take 3 areas of action to support the Breakthrough Agenda, and especially that it tackles very important sectors, not just for the advanced economies, but for emerging markets and developing economies. There are 3 areas of action. One is on finance, and we touch upon some of the areas, but perhaps more focusing on partnerships with international financial institutions. And there is a great deal of work related to localization of efforts and regionalization of efforts as well, that you will be seeing highlighted more this year at COP28, based on our work on the pipeline of bankable, investable projects, and the work as well that we're doing in the host country for COP27 on the green smart activities. The other work, which is basically on research, development, technology, and capacity development to do that. I'm happy that both the agendas of the presidency on the official side and the Marrakesh Partnership Agenda, which is the parallel one, have a very strong focus this year on technology, research, and development, including at the project level. The third area, which is really big, and it's a very big area of concern, which we are seeing that was not mentioned till now. It's basically about the operationalization of the high-level experts group, the work that's being conducted now in partnership between the champions, the work on the race to zero, areas related. I know it has some controversy in some jurisdictions, but I have to spell it out. It's about ESG and the environment, social and governance areas of work. And this in particular is providing the kind of incentives and guidelines for the private sector and their financiers. And we're expecting some progress, and I hope, without exaggeration, some sort of good alignment of priorities. So these are basically the 3 areas that you'll be seeing: finance, R&D and technology, incentives, including what's related to regulatory structure and policies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moaldin. The next question comes from Glenn Pierce-Oroz from SE for All. He's asking, he's first of all stating we need to pay more attention to regional contexts, especially in emerging and developing economies. And the question is, what is needed to scale up technology transfer into emerging and developing economies? Perhaps, Elizabeth, is this one you might be able to take?
Sure, I can take it. And I think it builds a little bit upon what Dr. Mahmoud was saying as well, because it's absolutely correct that whatever progress is being made, it's very consistent. It's regionally concentrated, and it hasn't been changing for the last couple of decades, quite frankly. Even though when you think, just think about renewable energy deployment, the business model, the business case is very strong, but we understand what the reasons are. I mean, the structural systemic reasons that they're problematic. I mean, the cost of capital is prohibitive. The infrastructure is lacking. The policy frameworks are insufficient, and then finally the institutional and skill sets are also presenting an obstacle. We are making in this report, we're actually making very specific recommendations how some of these can be overcome. Because part of it is really the finance side of it, but part of it is also a lot closer collaboration and transfer of knowledge experiences across regions. But the part that I really want to highlight is also that not everything is transferable, because also regions need to be empowered to innovate for themselves and develop solutions for themselves. So there is multiple avenues and facets that need to be covered as we to get the greater diversification. Also within regions, there are huge differences. It's not necessarily that one region is a coherent and aligned fully. This is where the collaboration really plays a fundamental role, because we are all on a learning curve. So more we exchange, faster we will move.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. And I think we have time for one last question about another challenge. Obviously, there's a challenge of the technologies being available, making them available in the developing world, and then there's another, I guess, a challenge for international cooperation. So the question is, with industrial competitiveness high on the agenda for many countries around the world, do you think strengthened international cooperation in these sectors is a realistic prospect? I think Timur, maybe you'll take this one.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you very much, Jethro, and thanks to the colleagues for the excellent question. The sector here, or there are many sectors that are exposed to industrial competitiveness. Of course, one of the key ones that we looked into in this report is, for example, steel. It's a highly competitive sector. Products are traded internationally. As I said in my interventions, the technologies that can make it to bring us to net zero emissions. So the near zero emission technologies are just still not in the market, and costs are higher than for the incumbents. So there is a clear case for international collaboration here. Innovation just works quicker, faster, costs are cheaper when you collaborate internationally, and the environment here is already difficult given this highly international sector, but in the current context, of course, it's additionally difficult. Having said that, I think it's particularly encouraging to see the progress that we have seen over the last year. We've been very pleased to see countries working together on solutions in these areas. I mentioned definition and standards in particular, but there's also innovation where there has been great progress on sharing technologies for countries where they're needed the most, in particular via mission innovation and the IEA's technology collaboration programs. So there is a good case here that is being developed in that particular segment, but it remains a difficult environment moving forward, and we'll do, and I think I can speak for all partnering organizations here, all what we can do in order to support the international collaboration aspect in these type of sectors. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Timur, and thank you to the other authors for their thoughts on these issues. That's all we have time for questions. Obviously, if there are other questions from journalists that they'd like to raise, please do send them. You can reach us at the IEA at press@iea.org, and obviously we'll make sure the right question goes to the right expert, and we'd be happy to come back to you. But with that, I think we're now moving on to the panel discussion. So I will pass back to Francis. Over to you, Francis.
Thank you, Jethro. I did see actually that Dr. Mahmoud had his hand up just in response to that last question. Could we just give him a moment to chip in there?
Absolutely. Apologies, Dr. Mahmoud.
No, no worries. Well, I like very much the reactions to the two very important questions on the regional aspects and industrial policy. One caveat, basically coming from developing economies and emerging markets. It's great to see industrial policies are back, which is good. But the bad is basically that some of these policies are not taking into consideration trade, investment, and technological collaboration. And some of the policies in some of the advanced economies tend to be more interventionist and inward looking. And what we like to see, while we are realizing very much there are tensions related to geopolitics, but we see hope of collaboration if the new industrial policies in which energy is really, and the rest of the sectors discussed in the breakthrough are in the center of the discussions. We need them to be more collaborative, more outward looking, with trade, investment, and technology being considered while these industrial policies are being designed. More of this discussion, especially at the regional level. We have two of them coming soon, one for the MENA region hosted in Riyadh in October, and the other one in the Asian Pacific is going to be hosted in Malaysia in November, and will bring the regional aspect of this important report to our discussions with our partners in these two opportunities at the regional level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. So let's move on to the roundtable discussion. And I'm delighted to invite our panelists, who I introduced at the beginning, but we have Ms. Lee McDonough, Ms. Maria Mendeluce, and Mr. Simon Beckbeck. I am going to start with a question to Lee, the Director General of Net Zero Nuclear and International Department for Energy Security and Net Zero at the UK Government. So Lee, based on your experience with the UK Government, how do you see the contribution of the Breakthrough Agenda report in delivering international collaboration for ambitious climate action?
Thank you, Francis, for that introduction. And firstly, if I can just say a big thank you for inviting me today to speak on behalf of the UK. So look, the UK has had, I think, a very unique role in the Breakthrough Agenda, as the framework was originally, as you know, launched by world leaders at COP26, and we co-chair the original 5 breakthroughs with colleagues from the US, India, Germany, Morocco, and Egypt, in addition to hosting the Breakthroughs Secretariat. So it's very dear to our hearts. And we're very excited about the direction of travel for the Breakthrough Agenda, both in terms of its expanding scope, thanks to the great work of France and Morocco on buildings, and Canada's leadership on the cement breakthrough, and also with the strong partnership with the UAE COP presidency, which the Breakthrough Agenda announced in January this year. And similarly, I think we're also delighted with the Breakthrough Agenda's partnership with SEM and MI, which was agreed in Goa, as you know, in July. It's a very exciting opportunity to really sort of cement the SEM MI ministerial as a centre of gravity for coordinated international clean energy action. So in terms of the Breakthrough Agenda's role, I'm sure this has already come up this morning. We're always very clear that the Breakthrough is not another initiative. The objective is to establish and run a global annual cycle. It's a process, and it's been designed specifically to achieve 3 key things. So firstly, it facilitates greater coordination between leading international initiatives in each sector, making it clear who is doing what, reducing duplication, helping to plug gaps, all of those things I'm sure you've talked about this morning. Secondly, it works to identify the most urgent international actions needed to accelerate clean tech transitions. And then finally, it works with the COP presidencies and others to over the year to align efforts. And actually, in terms of the reason we're here today, so the Breakthrough Agenda report is central to that process. And the authors, the IEA, IRENA, and the UN high-level champions, they've delivered another excellent piece of analysis this year. And I guess, from my perspective, I feel their recommendations are a real wake-up call and a clear call to action, both in the run-up to COP and for how the world responds to the global stocktake. So it's distinct focus on where international collaboration helps us understand where we as governments need to refocus our attention to drive emissions reductions at the rate and scale they are so desperately needed to achieve clean technology transitions by 2030. And we in the public-private sectors now need to act. So later this year at COP28, we will see further how the Breakthrough Agenda has helped enable strengthened ambition and implementation in Dubai across all sectors, guided by collaboration between initiatives and countries. And I really want to thank actually our initiatives for their leadership and drive in helping countries focus their efforts. Many sectors are already making brilliant progress, but in other areas, far more action and coordination is needed to see the shift that is truly needed, as was highlighted by the reports. So look, I'm also excited that COP28 new priority actions will be launched to ratchet ambition and focus minds on what needs to do next to respond to the recommendations in the report launched today. And so these actions will be a truly global effort, synthesizing the work of leading initiatives across the breakthrough sectors, both public and private. So I think it is incredibly timely to have this fantastic report produced today. Hopefully it will help us all keep on the straight and narrow in terms of our focus on driving forward these agendas. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's move on to Maria Mendelucci, the CEO of We Mean Business. So Maria, there's been a lot of progress on solar PVs and electric vehicles over the last year, as summarised in the report. And business obviously plays a key role in accelerating the breakthroughs. What more needs to be done specifically in the cement, steel and hydrogen sectors to replicate the success in power and EVs?
Thank you, Frances. A pleasure to be with you on this panel. Thank you for all the teams that have done the report and to help us keep on track on what needs to be done. Well, it is clear that that progress is being made, to a large extent because business are investing in clean energies. Okay, it is obvious, but let's make that statement. And why are they doing it? Well, because they have set some targets themselves, and they have been doing this for many years. And they have set a science-based target or 100% renewable target or 100% EV targets, and this is bearing results. And it's not only the results that they are bringing, but it's also the call on other business to do similarly. Okay, so at the moment there are 13,000 companies as part of the Women Business Network that have aligned and set a target to be net science-based targets to reduce emissions within and then there's more than 400 that have committed to 100% renewables. It is very interesting, this initiative led by the Climate Group, which is one of our partners, that they have achieved a 50% target, so 50% of their is renewable electricity. I think what was more interesting is you might have seen Apple yesterday presenting a really cool video and about the progress being made. And there's one thing that they said, which I love, is that they have now 300 suppliers having 100% achieved 100% renewable electricity. So I think this is not only what you do as a company, but what you ask your suppliers to do. It is how we're going to move from the thousands to the millions. Only in EV100, the Climate Group as well, 6 million vehicles have been committed, electric vehicles, right? So it is clear that the strong demand signal works and it can accelerate the deployment of clean technologies. Now, this is not only that. So the hard-to-abate sectors, they have pressure from 4 areas. First, their voluntary commitments. Second, the regulatory environment. Thirdly, the consumers. So the Apples of the world that are asking, can I have zero emission steel, zero emissions cement, etc. And finally, the finance also, who has targets to reduce their emissions. So, but the reality is that in these energy-intensive sectors, it's hard. It is expensive. It is kind of like renewables back in 2000. So what do they need? Well, they need incentives to buy this. We need regulations, and I think countries and companies need to start to put end dates for the use of fossil fuels to accelerate the transition. And lastly, a lot of investment in R&D. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot to do, but we have seen what works, and hopefully that will provide signals to governments to implement the same kind of measures that they did on the renewables 20 years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Now let's go to Simon Birkbeck, who is representing the COP28 presidency as Director for Energy Transition. So Simon, with COP28 being hosted by the United Arab Emirates in Dubai at the end of November this year, how does the presidency view the findings and recommendations of this report, especially on the role of demand creation that Maria was just alluding to, for increasing the deployment of clean technologies and sustainable solutions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to participate. So overall, the COP28 presidency are strong supporters of the breakthrough agenda, and we believe that our COP28 agenda is very well aligned with the broader agenda from breakthrough. We call for parties to come to the UAE in December to really unite, act, and deliver, and that links quite well with the ambition for breakthrough agenda, right? We want to drive collaboration and coordination. We want to focus on practical and implementable solutions, and we aim to deliver actions in this critical decade so we can keep 1.5 within reach, and that's really our North Star. And we believe that it's important that there's continuous focus on implementation and accountability of this delivery, and action from one presidency is taken forward to the next, and that's why we're happy to collaborate both with the high-level champions and the breakthrough agenda. So we saw both last week in the first technical report from the Global Stocktake and also in the breakthrough report that we are now launching here that there's some momentum, but we're not overall on track, and we really have to do a lot more. And we see that as quite a strong call to action. And in the anticipation of that, the COP28 presidency are complementing the formal negotiations track with a very broad and ambitious action agenda that has 4 overall pillars. One is focusing on fast-tracking the energy transition and mitigation. Another one is delivering on finance, and we have improving lives and livelihoods in nature, and then we have tech and inclusivity. And we see that as our view of, I would say, responding to the GST. So within the mitigation package, we have, again, a broad agenda covering all the emitting sectors, and also linking up with the various breakthroughs, power, hydrogen, transport, steel, buildings, where we focus on energy efficiency and cement. We aim to sort of build momentum and on existing initiatives and also complement that with some new ones. So on your question on demand, so our overall view is that in order to get to the outcome that we are aiming for, one really needs to look at all the different elements of the energy system, supply as well as demand. And there's a big role for industry and energy supply to decarbonize the supply side. Many companies can take unilateral action to do this, but there's also more collaboration needed. But of course, there's a big role in terms of demand and policymakers to facilitate that from the demand side. And that's whether it's for fossil fuel consumption, but also especially for heavy emitting sectors like cement and steel and aluminum, etc. So we're fully supportive of the recommendations that are put forward here and the importance of driving demand signals. And as a result, we're also building momentum on some of the existing initiatives out there, such as green public procurement, to really drive that demand across the heavy emitting sectors from the public side. We are also supporting a number of private green procurement, especially when it comes to demand aggregating coalitions, because we believe that it's important to build momentum on this, so they both in volume but also in strength are increasing. So you can, I'd say, move from these pledges to moving over the hump to actual contracts, where you see many issues right now, right? There's many good ideas, you have technologies, etc., in place and many pledges, but there's lack of actual traction on the ground, whether that's hydrogen or steel, etc. So building on those is something that we see very important to get over that hump. We also see that there's a need for sort of beyond demand to drive collaboration between industries, especially on the heavy emitting side, where we are working with across producers to strengthen that collaboration so that they can work better with the public sector and the governments to deploy the required infrastructure that's needed, finance and policies. So overall, from our side, we really welcome the conclusions and the recommendations for the breakthrough report. We are already working hard to drive support for many of these recommendations, and we really hope to get that broad support both for our work and the broader recommendations to show the world that we can break the curve and speed up action and ultimately keep 1.5 within reach. So thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, if I go back to Lee, your second question. So what's hindered further progress on international cooperation activity over the last few years? And how do you think this could be overcome?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I'd just like to say, just listening, there's really great alignment actually between the breakthrough and the COP28 ambitions. I totally agree on that. So look, I guess in terms of hindering progress internationally, it's almost like the downside of the success. But there's huge amounts of fantastic work being done in all corners of the world to advance clean technology transitions. But I guess the flip side of that is that things can start to get a bit messy. And so messiness leads to duplication, opportunity costs, and as we know, this can have an adverse effect on progress. And look, I know from the UK's perspective and what other countries and initiatives have told us, we often struggle to keep on top of the latest announcements and initiatives being launched, left, right and centre all over the globe. And so, I think that's one of the things that's hindered us in terms of, sort of really driving forward action. And so, I guess we also know that when we coalesce and form coalitions to solve problems, we can move mountains, we can make absolutely significant progress, real tangible change. And I guess that's what's behind the Breakthrough Agenda when it was launched in the first place, to try to bring together, the entire landscape in a given sector, across public and private, and try to identify areas where, I guess strengthened collaboration can really turbocharge the actions that we want to see. And I also think one of the challenges recently has been around erosion of trust in the multilateral processes, and we have seen some of that. But we know that climate change is an area where we all stand to lose if no action is taken, and we know that collaborating on a sectoral approach to emissions reduction can help make the transition quicker and cheaper and easier for everyone. So I think, in addition to the sort of NDC processes with emissions reduction drive through there, if we can agree to a new set of priorities in each of the breakthrough sectors, by COP28, then that is a really, great way to, I guess, galvanise action and join forces as we seek to address this, significant challenge we have. Thanks.
Thank you. So Maria, second question. How can the Breakthrough Agenda catalyse and support businesses and make clean technologies the most affordable, accessible and attractive option before the end of the decade?
Well, thank you. So we are preparing ourselves to COP28. It's an important moment to take stock, and this is what the Breakthrough Agenda has done with this report. But now, on January next year, countries need to start to thinking about their next round of NDCs that should be presented by COP30. So within those NDCs, we need to have clearly included and embedded three things: tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and fossil fuel phase-out dates, which are the key messages as well that I heard from Fatih Birol at the beginning. And I think it is important that as part of those, the different policies that are needed, to bring, the deployment, the decarbonization in these sectors are also included. We see that there are three things that countries need to do to accelerate the reduction of emissions in these sectors. The first one is demand low carbon products as part of the public procurement, obviously. The second one is carbon pricing, we can go on and on. Come on, we need to price it, right? It's the only way. It cannot work that clean energies are more expensive than those that are producing the externality. We need to change this. And then the third one, it is not about supporting the first really cool new project on hydrogen. It is about how do you support the next wave of breakthrough projects. the second and third wave, because those are the ones that will lead to commercialization. And in that sense, the Mission Possible partnership, in which we are a proud partner of, is working on that. So we spoke about there's two other things, and then I'll give it to you, Francis, is that we need to build coalitions of the willing in these sectors with businesses and government. And it is not a top-down, me, government tell you business what to do. It is truly a public-private partnership. And we have launched our corporate stock take, and this is the main conclusion that we have. And then the second thing, it is quite obvious, but the biggest barriers that we have now for the clean energy transition is permitting. It cannot be that red tape is our biggest barrier. I think we can grow older and we can make this happen and remove those barriers, because it is an obvious one that can be removed very easily. So let's do that. Thank you, Francis.
Thanks, Maria. So to Simon. Simon, the 2023 report, it provides a bridge to the forthcoming buildings and cement breakthroughs which are planned to be launched at COP28. How do you see the Breakthrough Agenda report and its recommendations, which we expect to see translated into priority actions by the countries at COP28, supporting the work underway by the COP28 presidency?
Yeah, so they're obviously quite different sectors, but obviously very important areas, right? So I think directly and indirectly, those two sectors are responsible for maybe over 30% of emissions, depending on how you count that, right? So the way we think about buildings is we see that there's a good momentum on electrification, and as a result, we really focus on energy efficiency. And it's one of our flagship initiatives to build momentum around renewables, tripling renewables capacity, but also doubling energy efficiency rate of improvement globally. That means, of course, coordination, aligning on standards for heat pumps and cooling especially, but there are just very big differences between countries. And as a result, we are encouraging countries to, of course, recognize this target of tripling and doubling, but then translating that into what that means for their own domestic circumstances. And what it, of course, entails is stricter energy efficiency regulation across all sectors, and for buildings in particular, that would translate into public procurement, mandatory policies, retrofit, new building codes, etc. We also are launching an initiative on cooling, which of course increasingly in many places are important to both be sustainable, but also to have access to that links up to the buildings recommendation. So cement, very different challenge. In terms of technology, the solutions are generally not commercially available, or at least not at scale, especially carbon capture and hydrogen. There's really a strong need to scale that up. And that, of course, is always best if there's collaboration when it comes to technology and regulation, etc. We are working with existing industry associations to collaborate on doing this, and specifically on an important enabler for this on hydrogen. We are pushing the broader collaboration and ability for countries to trade hydrogen, to take advantage of the production arbitrage, essentially to drive a mutual recognition of standards, so that one country can produce something that's recognized in another country, essentially sort of translate from one policy to another one. And we see that as an enabler to make the hydrogen component a much more efficient and cost efficient. So we, on these two elements, we're looking forward to working closely with these breakthroughs and launch them at COP28.
Thank you. So that is the end of the questions and of the roundtable discussion, and therefore of this whole event. I want to encourage everybody listening to download the report. You will find it on both the IEA and the IRENA websites. So please do look at it in more detail. And then that just leaves me to thank all of our speakers and everybody who took part in asking questions and listening in. With that, I'm going to close this session.